Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. On the agenda tonight, we're going back to 1972. We're going to be taking a look at Steve Goodman and he's going to be performing City of New Orleans. So let's get Steve up on screen and see how he gets on.
Riding on the City of New Orleans, Illinois Central, Monday morning rail. There's 15 cars and 15 restless riders, with 3 conductors and 25 sacks of mail. They're out on a southbound odyssey and the train pulls out of Kankakee, rolls past the houses, farms and fields, and passing towns that have no name and freight yards full of old black men and the graveyards of rusted automobiles. Singing good morning America, how are you? Don't you know me, I'm your native son. I'm just the train they call the City of New Orleans. I'll be gone 500 miles when day is done. I was dealing cards with the old man in the club car, and it's penny a point, there ain't nobody keeping score. Won't you pass that paper bag that holds the tequila? You can feel the wheels grumbling beneath the floor. The sons of Pullman porters and the sons of engineers all ride their daddy's magic carpet, and it's made of steel. Mothers with their babes asleep go rocking to the gentle beat, and the rhythm of the rails is all they dream. Singing good morning America, how are you? And don't you know me, I'm your native son. I'm just the train they call the City of New Orleans. I'll be gone 500 miles when day is done. It's nighttime on the City of New Orleans, and we're changing cars in Memphis, Tennessee. All a halfway home, we'll be there by morning, through the Mississippi darkness, rolling to the sea. All the towns and people seem to fade into a bad dream, and the old steel rail, it ain't heard the news. The conductor sings that song again, its passengers will please refrain. This train's got the disappearing railroad blues. Good night America, how are you? And don't you know me, I'm your native son. I'm just the train they call the City of New Orleans. I'll be gone 500 miles when day is done. Good night America, how are you? And don't you know me, I'm your native son. I'm just the train they call the City of New Orleans. Gone a long, long time when day is done.
And there we have it. I thought I'd let it play all the way through to the end because it is such an engaging performance, but also to hear the journey of the song to its conclusion. We've got that literal journey lyrically as well because of the subject matter within the song. And something that will fly under the radar throughout this whole performance is the way that Steve uses his technique rhythm-wise to keep this whole song moving along and chugging along. And that's something sometimes that can be referred to as a guitar technique, getting some chugging rhythm. And especially for this song, it gives you that subconscious sense of a train journey. And that's all about emphasizing beat 2 and beat 4 of the bar with the rhythm, with muted strumming. And that's exactly what Steve does throughout here. And this would have been something that he developed from an early age in his teenage years, certainly when he'd be gigging, playing at pubs and cafe houses, keeping everyone's interest when it's just you and a guitar. And with that folk music approach of keeping everyone's attention by making your guitar into that percussive element as well. So you won't have the luxury of having a full band when you're a folk singer or a singer-songwriter. So putting that rhythm in there and getting that percussive sound from your guitar is essential to keep everything moving along. We do have that instrumental section where Steve goes off into a little bit of a solo that combines rhythm with lead work, a few fills in there. But I will be looking at another video just briefly towards the end because Steve's ability on the fretboard was so advanced with some of the stuff that he could throw together, lead lines, bends, bluesy lines. We'll be looking at another video before the end that really does highlight his ability. And it's something that, again, people might not have known about him. When they're watching a song and a performance like this, the mix, unfortunately, is really low on the guitar, so you don't get to appreciate the fills that he's throwing in there. But that also gives you a sense of his vocal ability, because at no point do you question the mix, even though for a weaker singer, it would be so prominent vocally that you would question the mix, but you never do here. It's just something that as a guitar player and wanting to hear all these really cool fills a little bit more clearly, I then focus in on the mix because that guitar could be higher. When you've got a singer-songwriter like Steve with his engaging voice, the mix doesn't matter because when the focus is on the vocal, that's great because it's a great vocal, great lyrical content, and a great story within the song. And when the mix is really focused on the guitar, exactly the same thing happens. It's great because of the technical ability and everything that you can appreciate about his guitar playing. So with the top artists and the top singer-songwriters, generally the mix didn't matter because whatever was highlighted in the mix was great. The other thing you'll notice with Steve's right hand and that rhythm is there's a lot of wrist rotation in there. And what you'll find when you are playing rhythm and you're trying to get all of those muted strums in there on 2 and 4, keeping it driving along, but you also want to throw in some fills, you have to start introducing more wrist rotation above arm movement, because arm movement will take your pick from the low E string to the high E string and beyond, and then you're coming back all that way. Whereas when you're playing a fill and you're playing rhythm at the same time, you want to be able to have access to the D string and the G and those strings where you are going to be playing fills on your G shape. That can also go for your A string as well. Just to give a quick example of what I'm trying to explain here is that when you're playing the guitar and you're providing some basic rhythm, you can throw in your rhythm with your fills. As soon as you start emphasizing beat 2 and 4 of the bar, we get this. And you can hear those strikes on the string, which keep everything moving along. Once you've got that in there, you can see that my arm movement there is more restricted, going like that, rather than all over the place. So once you start getting into putting fills within the rhythm, that kind of thing, for that last fill, you could see how restricted I was with my rhythm in order to give me access to the D string fill that I started on and then did a hammer on fret 2 into the open G. So it just means that you've got more control over where you can pick and the fills that you can throw in, and you don't have to sacrifice that driving sound just by rotating your wrist a little bit more rather than relying on lots of arm movement, because the more distance you cover with your right arm, generally the less accurate you're going to be when you want to get really precise with your picking to throw in a fill. So it's something that Steve just threw in there so effortlessly, keeping that rhythm going, throwing the fills in there, but also singing at the same time. Let me throw that in there. I've queued up another video because I want you guys to see Steve's ability on the fretboard, not only with the rhythm work and the fills that we've seen, but his lead work as well. The great thing about this next performance is that he's never leaving the rhythm for long enough that it gets boring, and he blends rhythm and lead seamlessly. So there is so much technique going on in this following video. I like it as well because it's light-hearted and you can see Steve's personality coming through, but it's just killer playing on the fretboard as well. So let's get Steve on screen again and check out this other performance.
Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Goodman. When the red robin comes bobbing along, he no more sobbing when he starts throbbing his own sweet song. Wake up, you sleepyhead, get up, get out of bed, cheer up. The sun is red, live, love, laugh, and be happy. Stop squawking, still I'm walking through fields of flowers. Rain may glisten, but still I'll listen for hours and hours. And I'm just a kid again, doing what I did again, singing a song. When the red robin comes bobbing along. When the red robin comes bobbing along. Play one. Stop squawking, still I'm walking through fields of flowers. Rain may glisten, still I'll listen for hours and hours. And I'm just a kid again, doing what I did again, singing a song. When the red robin come bobbing, come bobbing along. When the red robin come bobbing along. How you doing?
And there we have it. So all of those lead sections that Steve's playing, keeping the rhythm going the whole time, and sometimes playing a lead line but hitting 2 or 3 strings at the same time to keep that full sound. I always say that there's nowhere to hide on an acoustic guitar. So the picking has to be spot on, and it is. And it's fair to say there's more than a hint of jazz in this performance as well, with the chromaticism, with the lead lines, and not relying on standard blues lines, even though Steve does throw a few of those in there. There is so much diversity in the playing here, not only from a rhythm perspective with the chords and the progression, but in the lead work. This is not a standard that you get to just strumming a few chords and then having a go at lead and then just somehow nailing your alternate picking, all of your technique so that it is super clean. So Steve was an amazing lead player on the fretboard, let alone a rhythm player, but blending those two things together and doing it in such a light-hearted way as well. I'm sure that a lot of people will see Steve in the last performance, like I mentioned, the guitar's lower in the mix, but we don't have a lot of designated lead work. But Steve was absolutely one of those players that could melt your face if he wanted to, but also play such an interesting and authentic lead for whatever song he was playing. You can see that he's got all of those options artistically that he can go to. We did have a little bit of background information on Steve in that previous performance. That was from the old grey whistle test, and it's something that they used to show up on screen, just some facts about the performer playing at that time. We are going to be getting into it in a little bit more detail because Steve is one of those artists that was so important in the industry at the time as a singer-songwriter and folk singer and performer like we've seen tonight, but also his writing that helped other artists get a break and also have a lot of chart success with some of his compositions. He started writing and performing as a teenager, and a quick fact that one of his classmates was Hillary Clinton. He started his own covers band at university, but he left after a year to pursue his dream of making music, and in 1967 is when he went to New York and he performed at Cafe Wha, and he did return back to Chicago, where he was from originally, in order to get back into his education, but he did drop out again, and this was because of music. He was just chasing that dream and doing everything that he could. It was at age 20 that he found out that he had leukemia, and this is what was causing him to have continual fatigue, and this was something that he had throughout his recording career. It was diagnosed very early on and something that he had to deal with. In 1969 he was performing in Chicago, and he was still pursuing his education by attending college. This would have been when he was 21 years of age, and he supported himself by singing jingles for various companies' advertisements. He got married in 1970, and he was closely involved with Chicago's Old Town School of Folk Music, and this is where he met John Prine, who I did a video on recently, so check out that video if you get a chance. It just so happened that one evening Steve was on the same bill as Chris Christopherson, and Chris heard Steve play and sing and was impressed, so he introduced him to Paul Anka, and Paul got Steve down to New York in order to record a few demos, and ultimately what resulted from that was Steve signing a record deal with Buddha Records. This is where we have this interesting story where Steve asked Arlo Guthrie if he could play a song for him, and Arlo said, "Fine, as long as you buy me a beer, and I'll listen for as long as it takes me to finish the beer." So Steve started playing this song, City of New Orleans, and Arlo was suitably impressed to the point where he asked if he could record his own version of it, which he did. And when that was released, it turned into a top 20 hit for Arlo, and it was his only top 40 hit in his career, and it also got to number 4 on the easy listening chart. So it was a monster hit for Arlo, and because of the success of the song, it meant that Steve could now go full time. So it must have been interesting for Arlo to have somebody who he didn't know come up to him, play him a song that would then turn into his biggest hit. So his luck was definitely in that day. And the other thing to clear up, when I say that Steve was then able to go full-time with his music, don't assume that by signing a record deal with Buddha Records that Steve was instantly a millionaire. Signing a record deal does not mean you're instantly wealthy and have lots of money. It just means that you now might have a studio that you can go to in order to record your songs, but also a form of distribution for your music. It just so happened that because of the success of this song, and the success that Arlo had with it in the charts from the royalties, he could then go full time. The song went on to be recorded by many artists, and in 1985 Willie Nelson's version won a Grammy, and that was after Steve had passed away, unfortunately. In 1974 he had a song that he co-wrote with John Prine, and I do mention this in the other video where John said to Steve, "Don't worry about the copyrights and the royalties, you can just take this song," even even though it was co-written, and that was David Allan Coe that had a hit with the song, and it was called You Never Even Called Me By My Name. And Steve did end up buying a jukebox for John because he did make a lot of money from the royalties from that particular song because it was such a huge hit. Around this time as well, he opened up for Steve Martin, and Steve was at the height of his stand-up publicity and fame at that point, so it did expose Steve to a wider audience. So in the mid to late 70s, he released pretty much a new album every year. There's one in 75, 76, 77, 79, and 1980 when Hotspot was released. And in 1977, he did also feature on another album by Tom Paxton called New Songs from Briar Patch. In 1983 is when he released Artistic Hair, and in 1984 was Affordable Art. And unfortunately, this was the last album that Steve made due to the illness that he'd been going through all of that time. Like I said, when he was 20 years of age and he was diagnosed with leukemia, he was now 36 and unfortunately did pass away in 1984. After his death in 1988, his album Unfinished Business won a Grammy, and his music was always critically well received. It wasn't as popular commercially, he didn't sell millions and millions and millions of albums, but he did have a lot of songs that were covered by other artists, and I think this is why he's been discovered by a lot of people through other people's versions of his songs. In the same year that his album was awarded that Grammy in 1988, some of his ashes were spread at Wrigley Field, which is where the Cubs play, the baseball team over in America, because he was a huge fan, and he also wrote a song called Go Cubs Go, and they sing this at the ground. So he was regularly down there and also talking with the players. He was a massive fan of that club, and he is now laid to rest there as well. But it's great to have a look back at Steve on the old grey whistle test in that first video, but also to get an appreciation of his ability as a lead guitarist as well as rhythm, and throwing in those fills in the first performance as well, not to mention that great vocal that he has, so easy to listen to. Thank you guys so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and both of the videos. Keep those suggestions coming in the comments below and let me know what you guys think. If you did enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one.